Well, over here on the west side of Las Vegas, I'm at Bob Lazar's home. And you can see here in the background is his jet dragster. It's an older jet dragster, one of the models with the J34 engine. That was the big, tough engine. But the story here is not this jet dragster. The most interesting story is Bob Lazar, the former government scientist, physicist. He worked at Los Alamos Labs, and he also worked at the secret S4 area that's just south of Area 51, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Bob, for the benefit of our viewers, someone out there that doesn't know who you are, tell us who you are. Give us your credentials and where you've worked.
Well, I'm a physicist and a scientist. I've worked at various government institutions, one of them being Los Alamos National Labs in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and also I'm more prominently known for working at Area S4, which is about 15 miles south of Area 51 in the Nevada desert, which is a top secret government research facility.
Where did you go to school, Bob?
I went to school at MIT and Caltech, also a couple other junior colleges here and there in California.
And what was your field of study?
Field of study was physics and electronics technology.
And when you were working for these different installations before you went to S4, you didn't have any connection with flying saucers whatsoever, did you?
No, I didn't have any connection. And in fact, I didn't even believe in them. I thought it was just, the rantings and ramblings of crazy people, more or less. Well, I was never interested in the subject at all, primarily because I didn't believe in it. It's when I was offered a job. Working on advanced propulsion systems is how it was advertised to me. And it was only later that I found out the job I was employed to do was to back engineer extraterrestrial craft, or an extraterrestrial craft. And it really happened backwards from the normal chain of events.
How did you come to get the job at the S4 area?
Well, that's a good question. And I really don't know if I can answer it. I don't know what motivated them. There are certainly more intelligent, more educated people around. There is a wide variety of high-profile scientists and physicists that they could have pulled out of the works anywhere. If anything, your guess is as good as mine on that. I really don't know why I was chosen. I did have not really connections per se, but I did know a couple people that were also involved in the project. I really didn't know they were at the time, but they could have put a name in, and it could have wound up that way.
You think that Dr. Teller might have had anything to do with it?
It's a substantial possibility. At one time, while I was working at Los Alamos, I went to see one of his lectures. I got there early, and he was outside, and coincidentally, at that particular time, I was on the front page of the newspaper he was reading, and he was reading about an article about a small Honda Civic that I had converted to run on jet power. And I introduced myself and explained what I was doing, and some years later, I had sent a resume to him and some other national labs when I decided to get back into the scientific field after I had moved to Las Vegas. And it is substantially possible that he had a hand in doing it. He did refer me to someone at EG&G, which in turn did lead to the employment at S4.
When did you actually see the first vehicle or ship or craft that you knew for sure wasn't of this manufacture on this planet?
Well, I did see it probably the second or third time I went out to the facility. And at that time, I wasn't convinced that's what the craft was. When I first saw it, I thought that this was a U.S.-made, very advanced next-generation fighter, and in fact that this would explain all the UFO sightings. It was only later to find out that that wasn't the case when I started receiving some documentation on the craft and actually got to go in it and found out what the scope of the project was. But I had seen it earlier on, but really didn't know what I was looking at.
And what was the scope of the project? What were you supposed to do to this craft?
Well, the scope of the group there, the people at S4, were to back engineer, essentially take apart and discover the manufacturing process and materials used to produce this craft, this flying saucer. More specifically, my group consisted of me and another person, his name was Barry, that we dealt with the power and propulsion system of the craft, and we were to back engineer that. We were to see if the power and propulsion system could be duplicated, and if it could possibly be duplicated with earthly materials instead of any exotic foreign materials that we might have come across.
When you saw that craft and you realized it was an alien craft, did that upset you in any way, that knowing that here was a vehicle from another system sitting right here on the planet Earth, and of course always believing that there was no such thing, it was hallucinations and so forth? What was your feeling inside when you were confronted with the reality that all that you had believed before was gone now, and you had to take a whole new look at things?
Well, actually, that's a good question. A lot of people have said, boy, that must have been exciting, and that really wasn't the case. The feeling really came over me when I was permitted in the craft to see the placement of the subsystems that we were going to be working on. And it was not a feeling of excitement at all. It was a very ominous feeling, a feeling, like I've said before, that you shouldn't be there. It's very hard to relay, but it was a real overwhelming, odd feeling that I had. Without trying to use a pun, it was a very unearthly atmosphere, and as it should be, because none of the materials were familiar, none of the architecture of the device was familiar, and it was very odd.
Yeah, because obviously they were here and we weren't there, so being a scientist, you would know the ramifications of such a situation. Which brings me to this question: how far in the future do you estimate that craft was to what we're doing at the present time?
Well, I've heard other people estimate things like that, saying, well, it's 1,000 or 10,000 years in advanced of our technology, and I don't really find that to be the case. All I really find to be the case is probably a technology that's about 100 or 200 years in advance of us, and the only reason being is because they stumbled upon a device, a machine that can actually make gravity, that can produce gravitational waves. Now, this is something that our science and physics knows. We know what gravity is, we know how it works, but we really just observe it. We don't understand it, and we certainly don't have a machine that can create a gravitational wave. And because they've developed this, they have a unique propulsion system, and that has a lot of offshoot possibilities and other uses. Also, the power source is fairly unique. We know of its existence. There is a total annihilation reaction we know of. The 3 atomic reactions we know of are fission, as you see in an atomic bomb, fusion, as you see in a hydrogen bomb, and we're currently trying to make a fusion reactor to provide power cleanly. And we also know there's a total annihilation reaction, which is a extremely, virtually 100% efficient reaction that we're really haven't even begun to do any research with, but here are these systems in place operating, and it really didn't look that far in advance of what we were.
Well, one interesting thing, that reactor that powered this vehicle was very small in relationship to the power it produced, was it not?
Oh, it was tremendously tiny. You're looking at something that puts out more power than an average nuclear power plant, and if anyone lives near one of those, you know how big those things are, and we're looking at something scarcely bigger than a basketball that's doing this.
Incredible. Do you think that these beings pose any threat to the human race?
I don't think so, and again, that's speculation. I really wouldn't know anything about that, but if the intent was to do harm, from all indications, it seems like, the Earth has been visited for thousands of years. And if there was any intent to do harm, it would have already been done. If anything, now this is just my personal speculation, I think we're more of a Disneyland, an interesting thing to observe, but I don't believe there's any real direct interaction. There may be, but I don't see any evidence of it.
Why doesn't the government just come clean on all of this? Because there's so much speculation on it, there's so much disinformation out there. Why don't they just come forward and say, this is what's going on, they don't pose any threat, and it's just something you're just going to have to live up to, people?
Well, it's difficult to do that. First of all, if they were going to come completely clean, they're going to have to admit that as far back as 50 years ago, they knew this was going on. And in the meantime, they've been spreading disinformation and lies about events that that have occurred. So they're not going to go and say we've been lying to you for 50 years. So to start with, there's a problem there. Even if they started today and said, well, we found out a couple things, and here's what we found out. Because these systems are advanced and they pose a real unique function, they present a substantial weapon potential. And because of that, all the information is certainly not going to be released. However, I've always wondered why at least the existence of the craft, at least a statement to the effect of, we have found some material, we have some information, a lot of it pertains to national security. However, we can verify the existence of life elsewhere other than Earth, and technology that we have, and perhaps release a little bit of information here, but they're not even doing that. And on that note, there might be several reasons that we haven't thought of. Who knows what beliefs that it might interfere with? It's a scary thought. We've pretty much put ourselves in the center of the entire universe, that we're the most superior race, and it might upset people to find out that we're really not that significant.
Well, with that thought in mind, do you think perhaps maybe that the aliens themselves may be saying, look, it's better if you just kind of keep it quiet and let us just go on about observing your little Disneyland, and you think that might be part of it too?
It could certainly be part of it. It could be the architecture of the whole plan might have been laid down by them. Who knows what kind of communication, if any, that we've had. But again, your guess is as good as mine on that.
How many different types of the craft did you see? Just one, or were there other styles?
Well, there was one craft that I worked on. That craft was a very sleek, thin-looking craft compared to the other ones that were there. There were 9 craft. I nicknamed this one the sport model because it was a very sleek-looking 50s style flying saucer looking thing, and the name pretty much stuck and people were using that name. I really don't know much about the other crafts other than the fact that whether it was accidentally or just a coincidence that I happened to see them one time. All the hangar doors were open at one particular time when I was there, and normally they were closed, but for the most part the only information I have is on the craft that I particularly worked on.
So you don't have any idea whether the other craft came from different systems or they were all from the same system? You have no idea about that?
Well, I do know for a fact that the power and propulsion system in all the crafts were the same. Oh. So that either says, now you have to start speculating that, number one, they either all come from the same manufacturer, or number two, someone is subbing out parts. And your mind can run away on this somewhere, because you see obviously a vehicle like this is produced. Well, there must be a factory somewhere, and eventually your mind just runs off with you, and you have to draw a line somewhere. Of
course. It may be the day that we will buy the reactor and the system and the components from this big galactic company that has the exclusive on it. Who knows? Maybe there's some sort of a patent on this thing. Right?
It's possible, but to me, it's so hard to believe, and I know that's strange coming from me, but I kind of draw a line between the actual alien existence and a social structure, and I think that's to keep my sanity, and I pretty much only deal with the stuff that I know for fact and had hands-on experience with, because your mind can really run away with you, and who knows what's going on. You'll find yourself standing outside staring at the sky wondering why no one's going to talk to you. And so to keep my sanity, I just deal with what I actually know to be fact, and try not to speculate too much.
Getting back to that, did you actually see the craft that you worked on fly or operate?
Yeah, I did. On one occasion close up, and on several occasions from about 10 miles away. On the one particular occasion, there was a test flight going on. They came and got me to witness a short duration flight, and I stood at the door of the hangar, and the craft lifted off the ground, which was an amazing sight in itself, something about 52 feet in diameter, virtually silently lift off the ground and just move around a bit and set back down. But that was the close range operation I got to saw.
Can humans duplicate that vehicle?
At the time I was there, that was not even in the realm of possibility.
How about, are they able to fly them?
Well,
would they be able to fly them?
Well, there was a test pilot flying the craft, so apparently we had developed the expertise at least to lift the thing off the ground and move it around. As far as taking it any great distance or taking it out of the atmosphere, it's something I don't think would happen. This is, a prized possession, an operating extraterrestrial craft, and things change when you leave the atmosphere. Things like the fact there's no air outside, the fact that there's not exactly 100% chance you can bring it back now. So, I don't think they're flying around to Jupiter and taking looks at planets. I think they're very careful with it. They're just testing it, and and will remain that way for an extremely long time.
It would seem like the government would really be just, all the stops would be pulled out to try to duplicate this, because this seems to me like the ultimate vehicle to move around, especially in our own solar system.
Well, yeah, you hit on 2 points there. It is the ultimate vehicle to move around, and imagine being able to go anywhere instantaneously. Now, without any weapon potential at all, consider that being a weapon potential. We have trouble in the Middle East. You know how long it takes us to get aircraft carriers out there? Well, we'll be out there in a couple of weeks. I mean, it takes lots of planes refueling. If we could be out there in the snap of a finger and load something up like this with tanks and weapons, that's or behind enemy lines instead of advancing in front of them. I mean, this is a tremendous weapon. And it's because of that, I think, where we see a lot of the secrecy stemming from. So they're kind of torn between pulling out all the stops to move ahead on development and putting all the stops in to stop anyone from finding out what's going on. So they're really between a rock and a hard place.
That's exactly how fast is it then?
Well, it can...
Don needs to ask exactly what was that? Then just exactly how fast is the craft?
Do you know how fast this craft might fly?
Well, it's because of the way that the craft operates, it's kind of the question really doesn't make sense, because it's a gravitational propelled device. And we know gravity bends time and bends space, distorts time and distorts space. When you move in a linear mode, you travel X distance in so much time, which is what determines your velocity. However, if you're distorting time and distorting the distance, the equation no longer makes sense. It's nonsense. So essentially, because of the gravitational propulsion of the device, you can move at tremendous distances almost instantaneously.
Did you ever figure out, or did they tell you where this craft came from what system or whereabouts?
Well, there was documentation that they had, but it was something that I couldn't verify. I knew what I was working on because I got to analyze it and develop theories about it. But as far as information from other people, I don't know if the information's correct, but I assume most of it was. If in fact it was, they claim that the craft came from the Zeta Reticuli star system. It's a star system called the Net, I believe. That's visible only in the southern hemisphere, so don't bother looking at it if you're in the United States. But it's about 32 light years away, which is a tremendous distance, considering that even if you were moving at the speed of light, it would take you 32 years to get there and 32 years to get back, which of course a speed we can't even attain now.
And of course, this craft obviously gets back and forth faster than that.
Well, it must, and because of the assumption that number one, it's small. Number two, there's no stores for anything such as food. It doesn't appear to be any waste area. It doesn't appear to hold any cargo. So wherever it came from there really fast. That's why another reason I called it the sport model. It has no luggage space.
Kind of like a dragster. It's
Exactly.
got no trunk. It's got no bathroom. It's
Right.
got no beds.
It's got one specific function to get from one place to the other as fast as possible, and that's what this looked like it did.
When were you taken off this project, or did you just quit the project, or did the project get completed?
Now we're into a long story. I never specifically quit. A problem formed, and I don't know if you want to go into a long dissertation here, but it was. I really don't know how to explain it.
A problem formed from. You took some people out to see the craft fly.
Well, I had taken some people out there, but that wasn't where the problem had stemmed from. The problem was before that. Because of all the time, I was keeping this quiet from my family and friends, everything. A lot of times I had to leave during the night. At the time, my wife obviously thought that I was running around with someone. Now, I had given permission during a lot of the security clearances to monitor my telephone, my mail, everything. I gave written permission for that. And as months went by, my wife started having an affair. Now, they were monitoring this and knew about it, but I didn't. And because they saw potential for an emotional instability, they didn't want anyone, they wanted the situation to resolve itself. So they stopped me from coming out to work. Some time went by, and then I began to get a little concerned that now I have all this information. They don't want me coming out there anymore. And this is when I started to bring a couple friends out to show them what was going on in case something actually happened to me. The craft is about 52 feet in diameter and about 16 feet high. Originally, some years ago when I came out, I had the dimensions wrong. I thought it was about 30 feet in diameter, and because I'm really not good at judging distances closely. However, I worked with some of the model people from the Tester Corporation, and they had some artists come out, and what we did is we took dimensions of things that I knew that were close up, and they scaled them back and essentially reconstructed the entire craft that way, and the dimensions and everything matched. So I think the final ones came out to about 52.8 feet in diameter and 16 or 15.2 feet high, something along those lines.
Tell us a little bit about the craft itself inside, where you went inside the craft, what you saw, and how, just kind of a basic function.
Well, there's 3 levels to the craft. There's the central level that the hatch lets you into. This is where there are 3 seats. In the exact center of the craft, there's the reactor that powers it. Surrounding the reactor are 3 gravity amplifiers that provides the power and the field that propel the craft. On the level underneath that are the actual waveguide antennas, horns, whatever you want to call them, that actually emit the gravity wave. They hang down in a triad at the bottom level of the craft, and they are movable. At the very top part of the craft, there are small black portholes, we've called them on there. Now, I don't know exactly what's on that level, but I firmly believe that that's the navigational system, and those porthole type devices are actually sensors that determine the craft's orientation in space, so it can tell whether it's from star fixes or landmarks or who knows what, or a system that we're not familiar with, but that's how the craft determines its orientation and position in space.
How about the construction of the different components? What was it like? Was it bolted together, snapped together, held together with Velcro? What held this thing together?
Well, it was actually, it was fascinating that there were no seams, no visible seams that I was able to see. There were no fastening devices, rivet screws. Everything had the appearance of being injection molded. All different systems that were connected to each other were completely smooth and connected, like you'd see in a giant, plastic injection molder. There was really nothing that was discernible as a fastening device or a seam to me anywhere.
Well, it sounds like some technology I'd love to see in Top Fuel. There would be some really fine things, dragsters we could build with some of that kind of stuff.
That's for sure. Judging from the seat and judging from the height of the ceiling, the being's height probably couldn't have exceeded 4 feet. That's tops, because when you walk into the craft, you're hunched all the way over. In fact, you have to practically crawl in, but you're hunched all the way over until you come up to the center of the craft. So it's certainly nothing our size. More probably half our size. 3.5 feet would be more realistic.
Well, you've heard, here's another area that's always been strange. You've heard all about these abductions. Everybody's talking about they've been abducted. What is your opinion on the abduction stories?
Personally, I don't believe them, but and again, that's something strange coming from me, coming out with a flying saucer story, but I don't see enough evidence, and it's just a gut feeling. I could be completely wrong, but I just have a hard time with most of them. And if in fact, they did occur, there might be 1 or 2 that may have actually occurred, with reference to Betty and Barney Hill, who were a couple in the 60s who claimed the first abduction. There is some interesting, evidence there, but I don't know for sure, and my gut feeling is that I just don't buy it.
And as you said earlier, they may be just looking at us like we're some big Disney World or something interesting to observe. And you said how long do you think they've been watching it? Did I hear you say earlier you think over 1,000 years or more than that?
Oh, more than that. I mean, there's very interesting old paintings from the Renaissance period that have pictures of flying saucers drawn in the background in the sky. Obviously not a smudge, but obviously an elliptical shaped craft and, with a glow around it. I mean, some of these are fascinating. So whether or not that proves anything, I mean, there's certainly mention of them in some older texts too. So from the evidence that I've seen, it appears that they've been coming here for thousands of years.
You've never actually seen one of these beings?
No, I haven't.
Have you ever heard of any underground facilities where they might have some of these beings?
Well, I've heard a lot of stories, and in fact, S4 is built into a mountain. The only thing, and the reason for that is to disguise it from satellite photographs. It doesn't go down unless there are parts of the facility that I wasn't permitted to go into, but I haven't seen any of these deep underground facilities where there's aliens working side by side with humans working on secret projects. I don't know if I believe those, and in fact, just because I have a negative opinion about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But I just have a hard time believing that.
Have you heard of any of these ships being in any other countries? Are we the only one? Is the United States the only one that has any of these craft?
Well, I've heard stories. I don't really keep abreast of all the UFO information, but the one that caught my attention was there were sightings in Sweden, I believe in the 70s and early 80s, of a farmer out there called Billy Meyer. And the reason that caught my attention is the craft looks exactly like the one that I was working on. He has some fantastic photographs of it. Now, people claim that the photographs are phony and so on and so forth. However, they look fairly decent, and on top of that, it looks exactly like the craft that I worked on. So if it was a phony picture, the chances of them building a model that looked exactly like the actual craft are remote. So it is possible that craft was there, or we may have been testing it ourselves and taken it that far, though I doubt that, but that has caught my attention.
Has the government given you any problem about coming out and discussing this?
Initially, there was a big problem with that, and there were threats and so on and so forth, but over time, once it started airing on TV, in fact, for the first day, they broke into the news here in Las Vegas and aired it. It was pretty much a hands-off approach after that.
Good question.
Bob, obviously this was all top secret information when you were working on this project, and then the news started to break the information to the general public. Did you have any problem with the government when this happened?
Well, initially, before it hit the news, there was a big problem. There were lots of threats and things of that sort. They even hassled a lot of my friends. I had a friend working at another facility on the test site working with stealth fighters, and they pulled him out of work and interrogated him, and they pretty much covered all bases. But after it went on the news, they broke into the news one night in Las Vegas that it was a hands-off approach after that, because really doing anything would really verify what I said was true, and it's pretty much been that way ever since.
And have they done anything like insert disinformation in to discredit you in any way? So people say, well, this is just Bob Lazar, he's the kook out there in Las Vegas.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the disinformation is so fantastic, it's absolutely entertaining to the point now. I mean, I've heard stories that I was a murderer, that I was selling women in South America. I mean, any bizarre story you can think of has been attributed to me, anything to discredit what I've said. And some of them are tremendously funny, and some of them have some basis in fact, and they've just distorted it and changed it around, and it's really unbelievable. And for the most place, you get most of the stuff's on the internet because there's no ramifications of anybody ever saying on anything on the internet. I can, put up a web page that says Don Garlits is a child molester, and you can't do a thing about it. So it's it's open season.
Drag racing is real expensive, especially top fuel racing. It's up to $10,000 a run now, whether you knew that or not. But what kind of budget do you think the military would have on a project like this?
Well, the budget would probably be phenomenal, and where the money comes from is another good question. It was probably originally funneled through some of the Star Wars budget, but it's labeled as a black project, which means it doesn't have any real accounting to it. It just absorbs money from other places, without any paper trail. But I imagine the budget is fairly substantial.
Now, where did they find the craft?
Do you know where this craft came from? Did they ever reveal to you where they found the craft?
No, I don't know if it was found, given, or dug up in a hole somewhere. The only information that I had was just the little blurb that they gave us that the craft had originated in the Zeta 2 Reticuli star system, and that's all I know.
But it wasn't damaged in a way, so it obviously wasn't crashed.
No, I don't believe that it crashed. It was in perfect operating condition.
Did the people who you worked for feel like that we had the capabilities of catching up with this technology?
Oh, absolutely. And that was part of the intent, was to, move our technology up to the stage and duplicate it. And that's what the big push was not just to duplicate it, but to duplicate it with materials that we had and were familiar with. And, I only knew what happened up to 1989. It's coming up on 10 years now. Now, wherever the project is operating, we know it's not up near Area 51 anymore, but they may have already come pretty far.
We know they didn't stop on the work, don't we?
You got that right.
What about the Roswell incident? Are you familiar with that?
I've heard a lot about that, like everyone has, watched some specials on television here and there. I don't have any inside information on it, but it certainly seems like something occurred there.
Well, over 300 people have come forward that claim they saw the craft or saw the crash site or saw a being. So in our today's court of law, 3 people say they saw you kill somebody, you could go to the gas chamber.
Oh, right. I believe in court, it's an absolute win. I defy anyone to disprove it in court. But, we don't have that opportunity.
Let's ask you about
Bob, for the sake of our viewers out there that are technologically inclined, can you give us a kind of a brief overview of how that little small basketball reactor, how it could generate power and cause a gravitational field to form?
I'll give a brief overview of it. It can get fairly technical, but basically what it is a reactor and an accelerator. The base plate of the device is something similar to a cyclotron, where particles are sped up in a magnetic field and accelerated to a high speed. The fuel is an element that we don't have here on Earth, known as element 115. It's something we also can't synthesize in an accelerator. There are heavier elements that we do synthesize, like plutonium and things along those lines, and generally they have a half-life, which means they disintegrate very rapidly, and the higher you go up on the periodic chart, the faster these things disintegrate. However, we have always theorized that there's a little island somewhere around element 114, 115, that elements will become once again stable, like other elements are, like zinc and iron and things that we're more familiar with. Well, apparently this is the case. Whether this element occurs naturally somewhere else in the solar system, somewhere else in the galaxy, or it's synthesized is, again, speculation. However, this is the fuel that's used. When this is bombarded with an accelerated proton from, the pseudo-cyclotron on the bottom of the device, it transmutes itself. It produces element 116, which releases a form of radiation that we really haven't seen, an antimatter radiation. And though antimatter sounds like something out of Star Trek, it's something that we do produce in small quantities in accelerators. It's a particle with a charge and a spin that's opposite of normal matter. The reason antimatter is so interesting to us and has been so interesting in science fiction is that when antimatter reacts with matter, when antimatter contacts matter, it releases 100%. It's almost a total conversion of that matter to energy with virtually nothing left. Now, in all other fusion and fission reactions, you typically see an efficiency of about anywhere from 0.8% to about 8%. And you know how much energy those reactions release. This is a 100% efficient reaction. So what happens is this particle is accelerated, it interacts with the element, it produces this antimatter radiation. It's just really anti-hydrogen is what it's producing. And this is reacted with a gaseous matter target. When they react, they produce a small explosion, a tremendous amount of heat. And how that heat is converted into electricity is a thermionic generator, which is something along the lines of a thermocouple. It's something that when it gets hot, as long as you put heat energy into it, it produces electrical energy out. However, the devices, we power spacecraft with them. We use, in fact, that probe that just went to Saturn, the Cassini probe, had 70 some odd pounds of plutonium in it, and it used a thermionic generator, but ours aren't quite that efficient. This is, again, virtually 100% efficient, that the reactor itself doesn't even get hot when it's operating. That's just how the reactor produces a large amount of electrical energy. It also produces, because of the element 115, which happens to have a unique property, that this gravitational field extends beyond the perimeter of the atom. And again, we can get into a lot of particle physics in that there are some forces that are mislabeled. But this field that the element produces is amplified, very similar to a microwave. In fact, microwaves are transmitted through waveguides, which are like pipes, and that's very similar to how this is amplified and also transmitted essentially through pipes, through waveguides throughout the craft, and focused, amplified, and used for propulsion.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it gets pretty hairy, but it is a fascinating technology.
This has got to be, Bob, the biggest story in the history of mankind. Why has the mainstream press stayed off of it completely? And you know how they love big stories.
Well, they do, but it's a dangerous story. It's like reporting on Bigfoot, because there's not a lot of evidence. Once you leave a project like that, you don't leave with drawings and descriptions. For the most part, they virtually erase your background, and I know that sounds like Mission Impossible, but even the places that I worked, the places that I was educated, deny that I was ever there. I mean, it's a far-reaching thing, and without proof, nobody wants to look like they have egg on their face, so you don't get mainstream anything to cover this. Until there's more evidence, there's more proof, and even if you got 2 or 3 scientists to come forward, that's still not enough. People want hardcore facts. They want things they can photograph, things they can touch, and things they can verify. And because of the secrecy involved, even if that was about to happen, it would, it would be squashed by the government under the guise of national security. No, you can't air that special. No, you can't do this, so on and so forth. So I don't think it's going to come out until they decide that they want it out.
Can the American people handle the truth?
I think so. The American people can handle a lot. It may not be what they want to hear. It may interfere with a lot of their current beliefs. But we adjust to everything. We really do. I think they're really underrating us.
There's been millions of sightings. My wife and I have seen a couple of things ourselves that were absolutely unexplainable. What do you think with all that sightings, there's just so few actual photographs and most of them are blurry? Has that got something to do perhaps with the way the craft operates? Or is it just the fact that when people see it, they don't see it that long and there wasn't camera equipment available? What's your opinion on that?
Well, there's 2 points you made. First of all is having any equipment available. Usually a sighting is exactly what you say, a sighting. It's an event that happens, it's over. How many photographs do you have of car accidents? How many photographs have you seen of car accidents? Other than at the drag strip, because we know something's going to happen, but just out on the road, you never have one.
No, that's true.
It's because the event happens and it's over. Now, the only reason you know about it or the news crew gets there because it stays there after it happened, but the actual accident, there are no photographs of because it's a fleeting event. And any fleeting event, that's something that you don't see. And a lot of people harp on that saying, well, there's no photographs of them flying. Well, it happened for 2 seconds. What do you want from us? Even if you got a camcorder in your hand, who says you're going to be looking at the thing. On top of that, because these crafts operate using a gravitational engine, the gravity itself distorts light and space and time. And all that stuff sounds, again, like science fiction and something that's difficult to believe. But we know that gravity bends light, bends space, and bends time. And because of that factor, there are, for instance, on the craft that I worked under, I was told that from certain vantage points underneath the craft, you can't see the craft, you can only see the sky above it because the light is bent around the craft. So there certainly could be situations where you could see something and someone 20 or 30 feet away from you could be looking at a clear blue sky and not see it. It's just the way things happen.
Will broadcasting this interview get you or I in any trouble?
What was that? I missed it.
Will broadcasting this interview get you or I in any trouble?
I don't think so. It's been about, like I said, almost 10 years, and this has been on the news and gone over a bunch of times, and I think it's pretty much staying where it is. I don't see any problems.
So nobody's going to be calling up ESPN saying, "Don't run that piece."
Well, if they do, it wouldn't really surprise me.
Bob, what's in the room next door here?
Oh, that's my lab in here. I do a lot of independent research or consultation, anything science related, physics related, along with computer modeling, anything along those lines.
You told me you were just you were designing or did the computer work on a rocket car that's going to go 900 miles an hour.
Well, I have a friend. His name is Waldo Stakes, and him and a rocket engineer, Ken Mason, built this car. And I believe this winter they're going to start running it. It's called Sonic Wind, and it's slated to go over 900 miles on ice.
My word.
I believe the ice speed record's only in 200 some odd miles an hour. So I ran a couple of simulations on my computer and just to see how the thing would perform. But it should be very interesting to see that. It's a liquid oxygen and LOX alcohol powered rocket. In fact, the rocket's a booster off an Atlas rocket, one of those old rockets from the 50s. But it's quite a machine.
I'd like to get you to look at my swamp rat 32 and 4 and see how it looks aerodynamic in here, because you've got a lot of experience in aerodynamics.
Yeah, to some extent.
And see if I was on the right track, and maybe give me some tips there.
Well, it couldn't hurt to run it through the computer.
I think we'll do that. Well, Bob, it's been great talking with you, and thanks a million. I know from myself and all of my fans, we really thank you for doing this interview. It's certainly been enlightening.
Well, it was my pleasure.